Hello and welcome to With Wellner Anderson. This is the channel where we talk about economic, political, and financial things in simple terms. We're in infrastructure right now, and what we're going to be talking about is gentrification of Manhattan. First of all, we have to define what the word gentrification is. Gentrification is when the lower class or poorer rated people are being forced out of their community by people with more money. It was initially coined in London in 1964 by a lady named Ruth Glass. She was doing an evaluation on a series of communities in London. That's where the term came from. There's also something that I call racial gentrification, where some community can be forced out irrespective of the money. It's just purely race. The word gentry is an old word. It's a word that comes from, I believe, France. And what it means is that it's a certain level of people, artisans, people that fit in between the aristocracy and the working class people. But one thing for sure, when you gentrify, you have to destroy a community. These are a couple of rules they use. Redlining, where they'll outline areas telling investors where they can and cannot invest their money. They also use zoning, which keeps out investment. There are cutbacks in education, police, health, public services, transportation, and the taxes go up. Also, restricted covenants is used, where they'll put in a lease restrictions on what you can do with your property. Back in 1949, Harry Truman created the Title I Slum Clearance Program. It brought with it eminent domain, which gave the government the right to seize your property if the public needed it. But in respect to properties like businesses, someone who's had a business there for 30, 40 years, not sure how they evaluate that. Back in the olden days, when there were tenements that were densely populated in New York, there were tenant laws that were created to protect the rights of the tenants. They began in 1867, they ended in 1902. Without that, landlords didn't have to provide heat or sewage or light or anything of that nature. That had to come over time, and those laws provided that protection for the tenants in Manhattan. A brief history of Manhattan. It was founded in 1609. It was founded by the Dutch West India Company. They are the sister company of the Dutch East India Company, which is a company that, if it existed today, would be larger than Apple, Google, Facebook, and Alphabet, and others combined. It was arguably the largest company in existence of the world. They made their money by selling beaver pelts, slaves, tobacco, sugar, and finished products. New York, unlike Boston or Philadelphia, was founded for financial reasons, not for religious reasons. When Henry Hudson arrived in 1624, he was amazed by the bays, he was amazed by the harbors, he was amazed by the Hudson River. Shortly afterwards, the Dutch obtained Manhattan from the Lenape Indians, and the Lenape Indians were the people to give Manhattan its name, Mannahatta, which meant hilly island or land of the bows. Manhattan eventually was occupied and acquired by the English and was changed from New Amsterdam to New York. Here, the first slave market was established. In 1826, DeWitt Clinton, governor of the state, builds the Erie Canal. What the Erie Canal does for New York, it makes New York now a rival to the Mississippi River system and New Orleans. So New York becomes the number 2 exporter in the United States at that time. Governor Clinton also laid out the streets and avenues as we know it today. The first immigrants at that time were Dutch, English, black slaves, Germans, Scandinavians, people from Western Europe. The process for processing immigrants initially was done by the city of New York or Manhattan at the docks, and at Castle Garden later on, where they processed 5 million people, and the federal government stepped into the program developing Ellis Island in 1892, and they processed 17 million people through there. The second wave was of immigrants were the Irish, from the Irish potato famine, the Germans looking for religious freedom, other groups looking for religious freedom, people looking just for a new life. They came from Italy, Poland, Eastern Europe. Chinatown was established in 1870. The Lower East Side was where most of these groups congregated. It was told you could hear 60, 70 different languages down there at one time. And it was also the most densely populated place in the world. In 1910, the black migration began. It ran until 1930, where blacks started to come up. But the major Afro-American point where they started to come up was between 1940 and 1970. That's when most of the blacks arrived. In 1917, the Puerto Ricans were given or listed as a protectorate of the United States. Puerto Ricans began to arrive. In 1944, there was Operation Bootstrap, which was the U.S. government putting money into Puerto Rico to try to get Puerto Rico to become an industrial island, not an agricultural island. That also brought Puerto Ricans to New York. In 1950, the economy collapsed in Puerto Rico. By 1954, the largest amount of Puerto Ricans in 1 year came to New York, to a barrio on the Upper East Side. In 1960, some of the West Indians began to come along. Now, I'm going to talk about a gentleman that brought us these things. If you've ever been to New York, you probably have been to this, or if you've ever lived in New York, you've been to something he's touched. The United Nations, both World's Fairs, he, I could say, allowed the Dodgers to go to LA. The Long Island Expressway, the Long Island Parkways, the Long Island Railroad, Lincoln Center, West Side Highway, Jones Beach, still one of the most attractive urban beaches in the world. If you lived or visited in any New York City Housing Authority building, Triborough Bridge, Shea Stadium, and much more. His name is Robert Moses, and he was known as the master builder and arguably one of the greatest builders mankind has ever known. He was also a master gentrifier. We're going to talk about one of the projects he worked on. It was the Crosswalk Expressway. It was done in 6 stages. We're going to talk about the Manhattan stage first, where it was constructed. There were over 1,500 families were moved. It totally destroyed Washington Heights, a Jewish-Irish neighborhood. Greenwich Village, he succeeded at the Cross Bronx, obviously. He had tried at Greenwich Village, but ran into a lady named Jane Jacobs, who was an experienced organizer. She put together a coalition between Little Italy, Chinatown, West Village, East Village, and she beat Robert Moses. This is the only loss he's had. Interesting enough, they say in Greenwich Village, the NYU wanted them to build an 8-lane highway instead of it's just kind of strange, NYU would want that. But in any way, all these are arterial highways, and that's what Moses thought. He wanted to put a highway across 125th Street. He wanted to put a highway across 34th Street, where it would actually, believe it or not, go through the Empire State Building. But the Triborough project is the most interesting project in Manhattan. The Triborough Bridge had 20,000 workers working on it. They had 15 concrete companies. They called it a traffic machine. But this is the unique part that I noticed. When you get to the Triborough Bridge and you're going you stop at Butler Boulevard and go north. Before you go north, you are parallel to 110th Street in Manhattan. But you go north through two islands, across the river, and then south 15 more blocks. What's going on there? Well, what happened is there was a deal cut between Robert Moses and William Hearst, the owner of the three major publications in New York, and they just demolished more of the west side, of the east side. If you've seen West Side Story, it's about some Puerto Rican gang and an Irish gang fighting in the Upper West Side. This is what Lincoln Center was before Lincoln Center was built. This is another Robert Moses effort. The place Lincoln Center was called San Juan Hill. We're not sure where the name came from. It could have come from the battle at 1898 in Cuba on San Juan Hill, where 30 blacks were killed. Or it could have come from the name of the gangs, the Irish and Puerto Ricans fighting, and San Juan. But in any event, that's what the neighborhood was like. It was mainly Puerto Rican. Prior to that, it was black. But when Robert Moses finished, there was 16.3 acres of area that was rebuilt for Lincoln Center. So, here's one other thing. A question. Who is the largest landholder in Manhattan? Well, the answer is Columbia University. And the buildings that Columbia University has bought over a few years have been dormitories. And those dormitories are in Morningside Heights. So now the area of Morningside Heights is being gentrified through dormitories for Columbia University. Columbia University owns 207 properties in New York, and most of them are in Harlem. The second largest holder of property in New York is New York University, and most of them are in the Village. Sugar Hill has started to get gentrified. They're starting to work there. Shriver's Row at one time, if Robert Moses had his way, would have been a project. That was his plan. But the black people in Harlem went crazy. They wouldn't let that happen. I remember 125th Street. Back in the 50s and 60s, there were Jewish merchants. In the 70s, the financial problems brought on difficulties. In the 80s and 90s, it was in total destitute. But now, you go there and you don't find the Pathmark, which was our local family shopping place. You find yourselves a Whole Foods there. But New York did fight back somewhat, providing affordable housing through the Mitchell-Lama law, where there were over 100,000 people who were found affordable housing. I'd like to thank you very much for your time. Please give me a thumbs up. Please give me a subscription. There's more to come, and you have a great day. Bye.